The live stream is ready when you're ready to begin.
Thank you. We will call this meeting to order for March 28th at 1830 hours and acknowledge with humility that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. I will say that Councillor Jansen is meeting with us remotely. Welcome, Councillor Jansen, and Mayor Martin is actually ill tonight, so he won't be here with us. With that, I'm going to ask if there are any objections to the approval of the agendas and the receipt of the near and long-term agendas. And I'm not seeing any. So since there's no objections, then they are approved by unanimous consent. Under receipt of and adoption of minutes, there's one set of minutes from March the 14th. If there are no objections, or changes, not seeing any, then we will consider those approved by unanimous consent. Public participation. So one written submission was received regarding the draft small lot design guidelines. This written submission will be appended to the agenda. During public participation, members of the public will be provided an opportunity to present concerns or ask questions of council. Comments pertaining to the following matters that have been subject to a public hearing are prohibited at this meeting. Bylaw 1898, Cannabis Retail, 1905 Souk Road. Bylaw 1908, CD 31, 3554 Ryder Heshdall Way. Bylaw 1912, CD 32, 791 Drummond Way. Bylaw 1913, CD 33, 2350 Souk Road. And finally, bylaw 1919, CD 22, 3460 and 3461 Veterans Memorial Parkway. Under the authority of the council procedure bylaw number 1890, 20 minutes is allocated for public participation. Each participant will be granted one opportunity to speak for up to 2 minutes. We ask that you provide your name and street to confirm residency or property ownership, and Colwood residents and or property owners will be provided the first opportunity to speak. Debate with or by any member or staff is not permitted. The following conduct will not be accommodated: outbursts or criticisms aimed at individuals or groups, rude or offensive language or gestures, disrupting delay of the conduct of our business, questioning the motives of any person, expressing a negative opinion about the personality or character of any person, speaking disrespectfully about or acting aggressively towards any person. When your allotted time is up, your microphone will be muted, and we ask that you please respect other speakers and remain within the 2-minute time frame. So with that, we'll open it up to the public. We have no one that's registered to speak, as I understand it. Nope. Okay. We'll move right into new business. 6.1 Development Variance Permit 691 Allendale Road. Recommendation from March 21st, 2022. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'll be supporting, goodness, we have adjusted the volume. I will be supporting this, but I just want to deliver the message that it really is important to me that we follow the guidelines that are approved. So I understand there was an error. They are being allowed to carry on in spite of that error, reducing the front yard setback for this building. But I'm sure that C-SPAN has more than its share of difficulties right now, and I'm looking forward to them being a participant in our community. And I don't want people to get the idea that even when it's small, you're supposed to follow the guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Those opposed? Seeing none opposed, the motion passes. Item 6.2, Development Variance Permit 137 Caspian Drive. Recommendation from March 21st, Committee of the Whole. There's a recommendation moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Sorry if you see me frowning, I'm just trying to look at Councillor Jansen and making sure that he's not making any gestures or his hands up. So with that, we will go into item 6.3 from Dennis Carlson, planner, regarding draft small lot design guidelines. Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the meeting of council on January 24th, council considered the draft small lot guidelines that were provided by staff. And following that consideration, as outlined by staff, there was a developer forum held on February 9th to review the draft guidelines and to provide feedback. The guidelines were also made available to the public on the city's website. At the council meeting of March 14th, council considered the draft off-street parking regulation bylaw and directed that the bylaw be amended to require that for a small lot with a secondary suite, that parking be provided exclusive of the garage. The draft small lot guidelines include a recommendation that where a secondary suite is included, parking in the garage would be included. This was based on the objective of maintaining neighborhood character by limiting the amount of hardscape in the front yard. Staff are recommending that council consider either one of the following two options: proceed with the appropriate amendments to the intensive development permit area guidelines in accordance with the small lot design guidelines, and that the off-street parking regulation bylaw be amended for small lots with a secondary suite to include parking for the principal building within the garage. Or option two, that the draft small lot guidelines with the provision of parking is contained in the off-street parking bylaw be returned to the public and the development community for further consultation. I believe the the team from Dialogue is available tonight remotely to provide some overview of the implications of the amendments to setting of the parking, and also to provide an overview of the response that we received from the feedback to the small lot guidelines. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that. Council, looking for a recommendation. Councillor Kobayashi.
I'll move it just to get the discussion going.
That would be the staff recommendation.
The staff recommendation.
Councillor Parkinson, are you seconding it? Okay, discussion. I'm just, Councillor Kobayashi, did you want to say anything as the mover?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Specific questions, Dennis, on this. See, I would have no problems with the original recommendation. Okay, but that's based on the fact that if that garage is usable, right? The problem is that everyone fills the garage with stuff. And then you're looking at least one of those cars being parked up in the street. And then we're just exacerbating the street parking problems that we have. So that's why I think this was brought up in the first place. So I don't know, you can't guarantee, I don't know how you enforce something like that, but I wouldn't have any problems with that staff recommendation as is, if I knew that garage was going to be used for that purpose. So that's first comment one. It's not a question per se, but that's just a comment. I do have some specific questions though about this whole small lot design guidelines. What concerns me right now is where are these going? Like, I don't understand that right now. Like, where are these small lots going? Do we have a plan? I mean, are they just going to go willy-nilly everywhere like we seem to do things? Or is there a plan? Are we sort of mixing these with single detached? Where are we putting these small lots? So that is a question I do have. And the last question I have is, I know why small lots, one of the purpose of small lots is to bring the cost of homes down. So is that the substantial savings that people say it is, or is that all just smoke and mirrors? So I have two questions there. Thank you very much.
Dennis.
Through the chair, in relation to your first question, Councillor, staff was also concerned that we were increasingly seeing small lot subdivision applications with no clear parameters to measure whether they were meeting the city's objectives in terms of neighborhood character and street state, for example, which is why that we brought these small lot design guidelines in front of council with a range of conditions depending on the width of the lot and how the parking would be accommodated, how the secondary suites would be accommodated. So that was to sort of get in front of what we see as some significant changes. In relation to your second question, what we're finding is, and again, what was part of the reason that we were bringing these to you, is that small lots are becoming increasingly smaller and narrower, combined with the issue that in order to maintain the affordability, and many times they need to include a secondary suite, which is even further constraining what is already a small site. So for those reasons, we thought it important that we put some focus on how we would accommodate all the elements that go into these small lots, given the constraints I mentioned.
Thank you. I've got councillors Parkinson, Baxter, and Day. Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Question, if I could, Mr. Carlson, was there a significant difference in the comments you received from Habitat for Humanity versus comments from other developers?
Through the chair, I think the inclusion of Habitat for Humanity was primarily to start getting a sense of the opportunities in Colwood for small lot development. They've certainly shown an interest in Royal Bay in particular, and they have done other projects in Greater Victoria with the same idea. So at this point, they were more or less on a bit of a learning curve.
Interesting. Okay, because I think when they spoke to us here, they talked about building sort of less robust buildings, no garages, for instance, and maybe not as much. So this, I would have thought that these small lot guidelines might have been counterproductive to what they were trying to do. But having said that, the issue that we struggled over, do we count a parking stall in the garage or not? And I think I've been persuaded that that is probably the right way to go. Every time I leave my place to drive up to a council meeting in the evening, I drive through the Seafield Road subdivision, and it's chock-a-block full with cars in the driveways, on the streets. There may be a few in the garages, I don't know, but I guess in reality, what are streets for? If we're building them wide enough to park on, we might as well let people park there. So if people park on the streets, it's, to me, a much different issue within a small lot subdivision in back in Royal Bay somewhere, or Seafield Road, than it would be when we discuss the parking at the corner, for instance, of Ryder, Heshtall, and Latoria, where overflow parking really wouldn't have anywhere to go. I think perhaps just as housing affordability is a fact of life, so too is parking on the street when you have small lots and suites, and that seems to be the way the world is going, and so I'm going to support this bylaw. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Councillor Baxter.
Question to staff. So in the report, you show pictures of 4 different streets that are small lots. Painter Road, Regency Place, Seafield Road, and there's some in Royal Bay. How many small lots are there in Royal Bay, do you know, roughly?
Yeah, as Carrie's pointed out, 110 lots, small lots in Royal Bay. The ability to have 110 small lots.
The ability to have small
Yeah.
lots. Not all
I
necessarily.
don't believe all of them have been.
I should just define that small lots are lots under 550 square meters. So in fact, most lots in Royal Bay are smaller than 550. But the categorized small lot for Royal Bay is 110 units. However, these guidelines would still apply across the board for any lot under 550.
Okay. So other than the 4 areas or 3 streets in one area mentioned in this picture, are there any other areas that are already zoned for small lots that haven't been built out?
Through the chair, not that come to mind. If I may comment, the intention of these small lot design guidelines is really geared towards the developments yet to come.
Yeah, I kind of figured that from your first answer to Councillor Kobayashi, but I was just trying to be more exact in exactly what is out there. Now I've lost my picture. So this picture, I presume you included that to show that people don't actually use their garages, did you? Or?
Through the chair, that image was included to illustrate when you have 3 parking spaces in front of the garage, it leaves very little open space in the front yard.
And that's very true. And that's a Painter Road lot. I just walked by there on the way here this evening. And but I think the point is that they're using all 3 spaces, and that's why I'm a bit nervous about not counting, counting the garages as parking spaces and maybe not providing any other parking spaces, as has been done on some of the rear access lots in Royal Bay. The letter submitted by Cablecraft made an argument that I mostly agree with about the coming difficulty that young people are going to have in affording both a house and one or two vehicles. But at the moment, certainly, although there are more and more people traveling by bus and bike over the last few years, there's still a lot of people who have two or more cars on their property. And there's only, I think, 9 lots on Painter Road, small lot subdivision, but there's 2 houses right now that have 2 cars in front of the garage, parked on the driveway, and every house has at least one. So I guess what I'm leading up to is, since in order to create more small lots, they have to go through rezoning, we would be able to consider each one of these individually for its precise situation. There's talk about the availability of bus service, but for instance, in Royal Bay, it's really not a great service right now, but once it comes into being, it might change the picture. So I'm prepared to support these guidelines only because they require a rezoning to get there, and presumably we can change any particular aspect of the guidelines to apply to a particular site, and it'd be a site-specific zoning.
I feel a butt come.
No, it's an and.
Sorry?
It's an and, not a but. We would, just to clarify, our intention is that if council approves these or adopts these guidelines, that we would, to some extent anyhow, try to apply it to some lots that are already small lots, as through the development permit process, to try to, as we said at the beginning, try to minimize the amount of hardscaping in the front yard. Recognize your point, Councillor, about how do you accommodate parking at the same time. And again, from staff's perspective, it's really a question of balancing those two objectives around streetscape, so that we don't have some of the images that I've shared with you versus the ability to accommodate parking on site and parking on the street. It's always parking, parking, parking.
Yeah. And the other point I wanted to make about this is that providing a variety of housing is in the OCP, and I hope that that variety goes down into the details, so that, for instance, we are providing some lots where you've got 3 parking spaces in addition to a 2-car garage, but then other parking arrangements where there's as there are already in some cases in Royal Bay, basically there's the garage or the street, and as long as we provide lots of different situations, hopefully people will buy houses that suit their situation and not do things like I saw happen in West Hills, where they park their full-size pickup on the lawn because there was nobody else to park it. We don't want that sort of thing happening.
Another and, if I may, through the chair. Part of the, to your point, Councillor Baxter, another reason that we've done this is when applicants come in for a rezoning for small lots, that they have to start thinking based on this menu of lots that we're proposing. They have to start thinking about which lots they want to propose in order to accommodate the elements that we're talking about here. So if they're going to make them all 9-meter lots, they are going to preclude secondary suites, which is what we're suggesting. On the other hand, if there's corner lots, which we are going to say those need to be 11-meter lots, and they need to accommodate other things. So it helps us as planners to provide more direction so that we don't have unintended consequences with subdivisions that none of us really thought we were going to get.
This is only my opinion, but I think there's probably others on council that would share it. There may be situations where council might want to depart from these guidelines. I think Councillor Jensen's already indicated that in one of his questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. I've got Councillor Day and then Councillor Jansen. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I guess my big concern with these small lot guidelines is the use of affordable home ownership as a driving force for the small lot guidelines. So the some of the examples that are currently in Colwood, where there's been insufficient parking, continue to have people parking on the street and considerable issues for safety, even of kids playing on the street. You don't see them coming. There's also been issues with snow removal because of cars that are parked on the streets. And the city is incurring considerable costs maintaining the roads where the people are parking have not really contributed to that parking space. In fact, they have, a single family home and they're not using their parking space. And that leaves the whole community holding up the requirements to provide that parking. So I guess that my big question is, in those cases where the small lot consideration doesn't work, doesn't provide sufficient parking, should it be a small lot? Or should it really have been a townhouse or an apartment building or a condominium? So I'm just wondering, how are we choosing the highest and best use for that land? Are we choosing it because the developer wants to provide small lots? Or are we choosing that format in order to provide affordable housing, which in the end makes everyone's housing perhaps cost more? Because if we end up going down the road of having to issue tickets and monitor parking, that's going to cost everybody quite a lot.
So through the chair, Councillor Day, we are also struggling with cases where we are receiving applications and there is not a strong suite, if I can use that phrase, of a criteria to evaluate whether or not those are appropriate for that site. And our hope is that if council chooses to adopt these guidelines, that by having this continuum of cases where small lots could be applied, but with different criteria, you're right, it may very well be a case where the developer will say, well, in this case, based on those criteria, I'd be better off doing a townhouse or some other format. Whereas right now, they can apply to subdivide for small lots. And as I said, we're a little bit constrained in terms of what to measure it by.
So on that measurement part, since I really feel like we've got an apples and oranges conversation, because we're talking about small lot guidelines, and one of the driving forces behind that seems to be affordable home ownership, but we have no information about how affordable they are. So shouldn't there be some sort of a proviso that says, if you create affordable units, then these standards will be applied. And if you just have market units where nobody knows what they're going to cost, then a different set of regulations. It just seems like everyone's making the argument about affordability, but nobody's connecting affordability to what we're talking about. So I'm just, is there no mechanism that you've considered to address the affordability issue?
Through the chair, affordability in the case of small lots is really based on the ability of the market to be able to pay the price of those units, which is why in many cases the small lots need a secondary suite to make it attainable, which is probably a better word for a buyer. Affordable has a whole different connotation to it. Your point is absolutely correct, Councillor Day. And affordable in terms of securing it is a very different mechanism through housing agreements or other means to make sure that if it's affordable, it truly is affordable. Mm-hmm. In this case, I would suggest, as I said, attainable is maybe a more appropriate word.
So just for comparison, Regency Place, which is a small lot subdivision, one of those homes before the prices went crazy sold for just under $1 million. So it isn't that, you know, so I'm frustrated with this argument about affordability for small lots, and that somehow our community has to, you know, do without space for people to walk and gardens to grow in order to put cars there, simply because of a perceived argument about affordability that has absolutely no facts behind it. So if we have no guarantee or even a good formula that suggests that there's an affordability benefit to the small lots, I don't understand why we would promote that. It's likely to cost everybody money when we have to maintain the roadways that are constantly parked on, and, you know, cars drip oil and do what they do. And the walkability and the livability of the community is reduced by having it overtaken. The roadways that are supposed to be for driving on are turned into parking lots, and people are weaving in and out between cars and across the road. Kids can be hidden by vehicles. So I'm finding it very difficult. I understand it makes perfect sense. Of course, people would park in a garage, but we know that they don't. And of course, people would park in their driveways, but we know that they don't. And where I've seen in neighboring municipalities where they've built small lots without regard for those parking issues, people aren't happy there. They're leaving quickly. I see them. I work in conveyancing. I see them. Somebody who bought 2 years ago is selling because they just can't take the way that municipality has laid it out. So I just want us to create, yes, some affordability. We all have kids or know people who need to get housing, but also livability. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I'll go to Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few comments and then a few small questions for staff. And I apologize, I have to sit with my leg up, so I'm away from my my computer here. This plan, when I look at this looks to me like a planned subdivision, but then I asked myself, if I wanted to subdivide my larger lot and put in a 9-meter lot beside me and build a small house, is there any language in here that regulates some of that, Dennis?
Through the chair, there's nothing to preclude a situation such as the one you described, which is really that if you go back to the origins of small lots, it was really meant for the situation that you've just outlined, which was meant as infill. And for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which is market driven, it's now become the sort of de facto subdivision model, which again is why we as staff are concerned then that if this is the sort of the way that we're going to see all subdivisions, that we do need to get in front of it with some direction.
Okay, so that wasn't what I thought was, an orphan lot buried on a street between larger lots, then this would apply. The language about irregular lots, talk to me about that, because quite frankly, I mean, I might be a bit cynical, but someone could come in and say, I mean, we dealt with kind of a horseshoe shaped lot down at Royal Bay recently that was awkward. So, what's stopping a developer to come in and say, none of this applies because my lot is irregular? Like, how are we looking at it? How are we defining it? Are there examples of what's irregular, or is that just with the eye of the planner?
So through the chair, and I think you're referring to the submission from Mr. Mycroft, there certainly is cases in Royal Bay where there is a fair number of pie-shaped lots just because of the subdivision. I would suggest that Royal Bay in some respects is a bit of an anomaly, because it's more likely that you're going to get sites such as Seafield Road, which most of the lots are regular as opposed to irregular. But in any event, the points that Mr. Mycroft are making around how do you apply this to pie-shaped lots are good ones, and staff will be looking at how best to ensure that parking can still be accommodated without hardscaping the whole front yard, as is in the case of some developments that have happened.
That's good. Thanks, Dennis. The 0 setback garages, is that an adjoined garage in the example there, or is that freestanding? My thinking is, do these people have to enter into some kind of strata because they're sharing a wall, or are they just freestanding with 0 clearance? Or?
Through the chair, the suggestion with these is that they would be 0 lot line. So they would share a common party wall, and most likely it would be something along the lines of a party wall agreement, but it wouldn't require strata titling.
Okay, I got you. So a shared inside wall kind of deal, separating the garage. And I think you answered this along the way. My vision, or what I envisioned, was an engineered neighborhood of 11-meter lots or 9-meter lots, what have you. I believe you said, we could see a mix of these variety of sizes within a development, obviously on a larger scale. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's certainly intention by giving a bit of a menu for lots and lot sizes. And so depending on the parcel size that's being proposed and its configuration, whether there's flanking streets or not, our hope is that they would be able to apply a variety of these types of lots as opposed to just cookie cutting one lot form, which is what we're trying to get away from.
And further along that road, Dennis, the design guidelines, would we be looking at some design guidelines on color and exterior finish and stuff like that, just to create more of a neighborhood appeal?
Through the chair, the current intensive development permit guidelines in the OCP are already pretty rigorous around the form and character of colors, cladding. We're pretty well served in terms of design guidelines that apply to the actual house.
And then finally, just a thought. a lot of talk about parking. It's a concern, and I believe that there are some neighborhoods and neighboring communities that have significant parking challenges that I'm sure that they regret to some extent. And I do believe we need to proceed with some caution. Nothing in here about really road widths or anything like that. And I just wonder if there's room for, you know, if we're compromising sort of on a smaller lot, larger development, smaller lot size, obviously more people. And I just wonder if some kind of connection to our road design guidelines might be pertinent here. And I guess what I'm thinking is the more people, the more cars you have stuffed into a certain area. I just wonder if, whatever our standard road width is, what is it, 11 meters or something like that, if, you know, a couple more meter width of roadway wouldn't be too much to ask to try and ease some of the burden as far as through traffic and the ability for people to park adjacent one another on opposite sides of the street and still have a large amount of roadway. Can I get your feedback on that? I guess that's not really pertinent to this actual discussion, but I'd love your thinking.
Through the chair, so there was some initial conversations at a staff level as to whether we should stretch this out to also include on-street parking. And our thought was we would just focus on the properties and not the street, given that that is a completely separate and different exercise in terms of, and I believe staff are now working on some road standards, which will be coming forward to you at some time. But we wanted to keep those two issues separate, although I take your point that, you know, there's a lot of concerns about the impact onto the street.
And I specifically think of an example here, Dennis, is Seafield Road there with sort of the interesting scallop cutouts. Opposing traffic has to yield, and it also gives up a certain amount of on-street parking, which I think is at a premium. And I believe Councillor Day has some valid points on on-street parking. But I'll wrap up my thoughts, Mr. Chair. I think this is great stuff to talk about. This is on point as far as planning goes for the future of our community. I do believe offering different housing stock will help our young people and our residents and those moving to our community to provide them with different options. Some people may not want to move into an apartment, but they may prefer a small lot home, and that might meet their needs. So I believe offering a variety of options is certainly within our purview. Further to that, I think, again, in response to Councillor Day, I think the only thing we can take to the bank literally is that a smaller lot or a lot of this size has to cost less than my lot. And I think that's probably a safe assumption. So I believe that we would be impacting the, our market here in a positive way. Those are my thoughts, Mr. Chair. I would love to see some connection with road design down the road. I get that that's not this, but I'm hoping that comes back at some point. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Jansen. Before we get to the second time speakers, I just had a couple of questions, Dennis. The one is with regards to Mr. Mycroft's correspondence today. How would a secondary suite be achieved if these guidelines passed?
So in those cases, and there actually are some cases similar to that within the Royal Bay development, they can achieve at that time, it was 2 parking spaces in front of the garage plus 1 for the suite. And if you go through some of the cul-de-sacs in particular, where these conditions that Mr. Mycroft's talking about apply, the result is they've accommodated the parking, but it's a hardscape from property line to property line. So the answer is, and this is where I think we maybe need to do a little more work around what conditions should we be applying to pie-shaped lots, and perhaps it should be something along the lines that we've proposed for regular shaped lots, where certain pie shaped lots simply would not lend themselves to small lots, to secondary suites.
Thank you. And I think you basically answered this when you were responding to Councillor Baxter. But it sounds like, if this passes, council is basically restricting secondary suites for small lots with this kind of parking amendment. Is that fair to say?
It's restricting secondary suites in certain cases. So for example, if what we're proposing, like for 9-meter wide lot, which is about 30 feet in English, you would not, if it was a subdivision that came to us and this was in force, you would not be able to achieve a secondary suite in there because you just don't have the room. So that's where the applicant would have to decide if they want to include secondary suites for whatever reason. They would have to be looking at wider lots, which is what we're proposing in the guidelines.
Thank you. We'll go to second time speakers, Councillor Kobayashi and Parkinson. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question here, Dennis. With these small lots here, what problem are we solving with this? It's certainly not an affordable home issue here, because these are still going to come in expensive. I know that, but my gut tells me that. So it's not an affordable housing issue that we're solving. So what are we solving? I'm just trying to understand what the problem is that we're solving with this. I mean, you've done some great work on this, believe me, and I give you full marks on it, but I'm just trying to clearly understand. Is this like the considered missing middle houses that people tell us that we should be building?
So through the chair, Colwood already permits small lots throughout Colwood. That's not staff's objective here. Staff's objective is that we became increasingly concerned about the character of the neighborhood that was starting to evolve, the streetscape character. If you recall, when I was here, I think in January, I gave some images from other places that showed what happens when you just allow the whole street to be hardscaped. And from staff's perspective, that's not a streetscape character nor a neighborhood character that we're suggesting we follow. So it's really around those elements. The price of those units, whether they're attainable or affordable, whatever term you want to use, is not really part of the scope of this work.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Parkinson. Oh, geez, can you?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, a good discussion here tonight, and it has made me think of a few questions I'd like to understand. When Councillor Baxter was talking about where these would apply and how many lots were zoned for it, isn't the zoning for Latoria South and Royal Beach and perhaps even Olympic View, doesn't that include a number of small lots already?
Through the chair to Councillor Parkinson, you're absolutely correct. But the staff's intention would be that if these small lot guidelines were adopted, that when those subdivisions come forward, that we would use these criteria at that time to say, okay, how do you want to proceed with this subdivision given these menu of choices that you have for small lots?
Right, but not as Councillor Baxter was thinking, it wouldn't come to council for discussion.
That's correct.
And then Councillor Jansen talked about wider streets, which sort of frankly horrified me when I think of driving through and again I'll use Seafield Road because I know it so well. There's cars parked on both sides. You widen the road, I may go a little faster, but I probably wouldn't, but others would. So the narrow streets is probably good with this. But then it made me think again, we have, I think, approved differing road standards in both Latoria South and Olympic View. And to what extent does that allow for street parking? And have we got ourselves in a jam if we say, yeah, you can have these nice narrow road standards you want, and then now you can have these small lots, which are whatever guidelines we want to propose are going to put cars on the street. And do we have a conflict there?
Through the chair, I don't recall the exact figure, but when we did the survey of occupants of small lot developments, and we asked them where they park their cars. I think it was something in the order of only 10%, and I'm going from my old memory, parked on the street. So the majority of them park in front of the garage, in other words, on the driveway. So it isn't necessarily the case that they're all going to be fighting for on-street parking.
Yeah, I would suggest my empirical thought process would say there's going to be a lot of on-street parking. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I can live with that as long as it's not at a busy intersection, but also as long as it's not on a narrow road that doesn't have a place for on-street parking, and then we will end up with people parking on the front lawns and what have you. So there obviously needs to be some coordination between the road standard and the lot design, which I assume staff would look at, but would probably never come to this council table. Is that correct?
Through the chair, my understanding is that there is a street and subdivision bylaw. I'm not sure what is that the right name, but that will be coming forward to council at some point, which will be looking at road standards for Colwood. I would suggest that it's less an issue of the width of the road and more how parking is accommodated along the frontage. Staff and council, and Royal Bay is a good example of this, where we've tried to balance just having sidewalk, asphalt sidewalk, and nothing else in between the property lines, and bulbing out parking areas to introduce some landscaping. I think there's maybe some lessons learned from whether that has been worth giving up the parking. And staff will be looking at those as we move forward with Latoria South and other developments, how best to accommodate parking. But still, as I said earlier, trying to maintain some sort of neighborhood character so that there's some semblance of landscaping and open space balanced with the parking, which is always a challenge.
Understood, and then certainly not criticizing the efforts to date, but if I owned Royal Bay South, Latoria South, or Olympic View, and had this council approved road standards, and now I have these small lot guidelines that say everybody's going to park in the garage and on the driveway, could I force that through? Could I say, no, that's the standards, that's it, and that's what we're going to do? And then to me, that would lead to parking problems on the street. How do we protect future citizens of Colwood from that?
I guess the answer I would give to that is that in certain cases, I think people will just, to be honest, sort themselves out. I stand to be corrected, but I think, for example, with Latoria North, initially as development started, we received a lot of phone calls and complaints about people trying to sort out their parking issues. It's a lot of it driven by the high school, understandably. My sense of things, and I stand to be corrected, is I think that has alleviated quite a bit over the last few years as people kind of learn to live with their neighbors and adjust themselves. So I think, again, as I said, it comes down to the balancing of providing parking, but also maintaining some semblance of a neighborhood character that people will find enjoyable in a place that they want to live.
You know, I hear you, and I'm with this. People will sort it out, and it'll work if there's a place. But my recollection of some of those road standards in Olympic View, especially where they were quite narrow, and you know, they may not fit with small lots. And I just would like to make sure that there's some mechanism in place to prevent small lots getting built on a very narrow road without parking ability. If there's place for them to park on the street, the width of the road's probably fine and the small lots are probably fine. But if there isn't, I don't think any of us at this table believe that everybody on a small lot is going to park in the garage and on the driveway only. So it's my concern.
Great, thank you, Councillor Parkinson. I've got Councillors Baxter and Day, and then I'll be calling the question. Councillor Baxter.
I just want to make a plea that everybody stop using the words affordable and attainable. They're absolutely meaningless. There was a $14 million lot sold in Machosen not so long ago. Somebody found that affordable. Is that an affordable lot? Yeah, to somebody. And then there are other people who can't afford anything that's for sale in this area. But does that mean there are no affordable lots? Well, clearly some people afford them. So it doesn't mean anything. I think the only two terms that mean anything in this regard are market and non-market. And if it's market, if it's a market lot, it will be sold at the market rate, and that will vary depending on many things, including the mortgage interest rate and the volume of demand. If it's non-market, that means it's subsidized by somebody and becomes a place, depending on the level of subsidy, that people who cannot buy market housing or cannot rent market housing are able to rent or buy. So just a plea to use market and non-market, not affordable, because affordable doesn't mean anything.
Take your point, Councillor Baxter. Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I guess I'm wondering why, when we're talking about parking on the report, there's a graph talking about the lot widths and whether they have, you know, what percentage of the front yard, etc. It's on the bottom of, I can't tell what page, but there's nothing on that that shows what is the on-street parking that's available. So that tells me that this has been done completely separate from evaluating what on-street parking is available, which I think is short-sighted. So I live in an old neighborhood where with large lots, and because of the topography, it's very steeply graded. Most people are parking on the street. And I find it frustrating as a neighbor. I don't want to be angry with my neighbors, but it makes it very difficult to walk. It makes it very difficult to cycle. It makes it less attractive. So I think we need to get it right. And there's a significant shift that's happening. I'm not sure if it's intended, but the older versions of Colwood, every resident was expected to maintain their own parking areas. And now we're shifting to smaller lots where somehow it seems okay to put that burden on the city, to have vehicles parked on city property. And I don't think that's good for all of Colwood in the long run, not because I'm pro-car or anti-car or anything like that, just that it makes it another administrative task for the city to have to do to either enforce the parking or sort it out. And I know it has a lot to do with how things are being configured. and especially with Royal Bay Beach and Latoria South coming on board and Olympic View, most of our roadways have now defaulted to what used to be the minimum, which is 6 meters width. And that width was based on getting a fire truck in and out. So we are talking about life and health safety if you just plug up all the roads with people parking wherever they can. And I can point to areas in Colwood where one of the very first small lot subdivisions went in, their parking on their short cul-de-sac street was inadequate for the number of vehicles that are there. They're now parking on Latoria Road in what should be the bike lane. So if we don't get it right, there are consequences, and it's very difficult to walk it back. So once people feel entitled to park on the street, like good luck if I ever said anything to my neighbors who park on the road, because they've been doing it for so many years that they feel that they're entitled to that. And we learn to live with each other, but we're not going to be able to do that because the roadway that I'm talking about, where they've been parking there for 30 years, is wide enough that there can be somebody parked on both sides of the road and the fire truck can still come down the road. But if you're the new standard of the new smaller roads, then no, you're not going to get, and you're certainly not going to get an ambulance in there either. And that those have been issues that have come up in small lot subdivisions. So I'm just concerned that we're looking at a big picture that's affecting both our property and property that will be owned by somebody else. And we're only talking about the regulations on the property itself. We're not talking about what's available on street. If we had more time, would you consider looking at what parking availability there is? Or is that something that you can look at outside of the small lot guidelines?
So through the chair, in response to Councillor Day, these design guidelines are predicated on the required parking under the zoning bylaw is met on site. So in the case of a principal house, it's 2. Principal house with a secondary suite, it's 3. What is being considered here tonight by staff is where do you want to put those 3 spaces? Do you want to include the garage? You don't want to include the garage. So no matter which guideline council adopts, the required parking will be provided on the site. But I think Councillor Day, to your other point about, okay, if they don't park there and they choose to park on the street, which is, I think, your point, then my understanding, as I said, I believe that there is a road standards bylaw that's going to be coming, street standards bylaw, it's going to be coming to council for your consideration. And that would certainly be something that could be brought up at that time. And every situation sort of lends itself to a different scenario in terms of on-street parking, which is why we've deliberately kind of kept it separate. I think we've learned some lessons around how to accommodate on-street parking, which I hope will be included in the discussion and when that street standards comes before you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Day, and thank you, Dennis, for that great summary. So with that, I'm going to call the question. So we do have a motion on the table, and that is the staff recommendation before us. Those that are opposed? I see Councillor Day opposed, and Councillor Logan is opposed. And so the motion passes. Okay, we will go on to item 6.4, report from Desiree Gibbons, our planner, on local government comment on non-medical cannabis license. Desiree, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to share my screen. Are you able to see it okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So you're seeing the recommendation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the next item in your agenda is the request for local government comment on the provincial application for a non-medical cannabis license by Rise Cannabis. As you are aware, Rise Cannabis is undertaking a rezoning process with the City of Colwood and is requesting a text amendment to permit a cannabis retail store at 1905 Souk Road, unit number 2. So Rise Cannabis is currently, they received third reading last fall on September 13th, 2021. As per the city's cannabis retail store policy, the application is now being held at third reading until it receives provincial approval or approval in principle. Rise Cannabis is currently working through the provincial licensing process to open a cannabis retail store, and one of the requirements is that they receive fit and proper. On March 16th, the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch confirmed Rise Cannabis has completed its assessment of the eligibility and suitability requirements, and that they are now considered fit and proper. A copy of this letter is attached in Appendix 1. And then another provincial requirement that must be met prior to the issuance of a non-medical cannabis license is a positive recommendation from the local government of the area in which the proposed store will be located. The remainder of the provincial licensing process will depend in part on this local recommendation. So the report included in your agenda tonight recommends that Council support the provincial application for a non-medical cannabis license that was submitted by Rise Cannabis to operate a licensee retail sales location at 1905 Souk Road. It complies with the city's cannabis retail store policy. It's currently being held at third reading, and a public consultation has occurred. I am available for questions if you have any.
That's great. Thank you, Desiree. And I see Councillor Jansen has his hand up.
I'll move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We will move now into bylaws. Bylaw number 1700-05, official community plan bylaw 2021 housekeeping amendment, first and second reading. And there's a report from Jill. Now, are you giving it yet? Pardon? Oh, Ian. Oh, there we go. Ian.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Logan. Unfortunately, Ms. Collinson sends her regrets. She couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to present on her behalf. The report before you contains updated background information and bylaw wording to support your considerations of first and second readings of official community plan bylaw number 1705. Last July, Council directed staff to prepare an OCP amendment to include housekeeping updates for recently completed policy work, improved clarity, and the addition of housing supply figures from the city's housing needs report. Since this time, wording has been updated and is included in the proposed bylaw to offer greater flexibility and clarity in several of the design guidelines proposed to be amended. Table 1 in the staff report offers a summary of existing OCP policy and what is included in the draft bylaw presented for initial readings. As per legislative requirements, staff commenced initial consultation, and to date no comments have been received by any third parties or jurisdictions. If Council grants the proposed bylaw first and second readings, staff will undertake a second referral round for comment as required. Thank you. That concludes my introduction.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair Logan. I'd just like to move the recommendation.
Very good. Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Jansen. Any discussion? Sorry, that was on first and second reading? Yeah, thank you. On first and second reading. Thanks so much. Any discussion? Seeing none. Those opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. We'll move on to bylaw 7.2, number 1920 Colwood Main Sewer LAS enlargement, 502 Ridley Drive for first, second, and third reading. Looking for a mover? Moved by Councillor Baxter. Seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those opposed? None opposed, the motion passes. And bylaw number item number 7.3, bylaw number 1923, which is the 2022, the 2026 financial plan. I see our Director of Finance just on the edge of her seat waiting for approval. Can I have a mover on fourth reading? Final read, moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Any discussion? Seeing none, those opposed? None opposed? Well done and congratulations. Awesome. With that, looking for a motion to adjourn. Well, Councillor Day, Councillor Parkinson, not opposed.
Good night, everyone.